I didn't hear the first laugh so much as feel it, like a fingernail drawn across a plate. I was halfway up the church steps, one hand on the rail, the other on the curve of my stomach, when the laughter cracked and hid itself inside a cough. The bell kept tolling Sunday into the valley. People parted just enough to let me pass, eyes blinking slower than usual, like the light inside them had turned to syrup. I walked anyway. I had to. If I turned back now, the story would eat my name whole. The wooden doors sighed open. Cold air, lemons, and old hymnals. Sunlight pooled across the aisle in shards of color from stained glass. Rose, emerald, cobalt, cutting stripes across my dress. The usher said good morning with lips that barely moved. I nodded and kept moving, the cane pulling more weight than I wanted to admit. Thor waited outside with Daniel, huge and patient at the foot of the steps, a shadow that had learned my heartbeat long before anyone else did. Page 214. Pastor Green said from the pulpit, calm as a lake, let us sing. Voices rose, a river that refused to carry me. I slid into a pew near the back, the varnish cool against my palm, the cushion sinking a little under the baby's weight. Somewhere behind me, a program rustled like a secret. The first verse began. I tried to catch it, to let the melody hold me up. But then a woman in a polka dot dress leaned toward her friend, and two words slipped out soft as oil. The dog. I looked straight ahead. The glass Jesus above the altar looked back at me through slashes of blue. My fingers curled until my nails pressed half moons into my hand. The rumor had legs. It had teeth. It had a route through kitchens and back porches, the gas pumps at Johnson's fill station, the tables at Ruby May's diner. By last night, it had already reached my father's desk, his voice flat on the phone. Selene, for God's sake, do you understand what this does? The second verse didn't wait for me. On the left, a man cleared his throat and studied the ceiling. Two teenage boys watched me, the way boys watch a dare. The older one nudged the younger and smiled without using his eyes. I shifted my weight, and the floor creaked like an accusation. Scripture. Pastor Green announced, closing the hymnal. He spoke about mercy, but his words slid across the room like rain on a tin roof. I could feel people rewriting the sermon in their heads, swapping mercy for punishment, swapping scripture for gossip, rewriting me. Someone behind me, Martha Lee, I'd know her perfume anywhere, vanilla and hairspray, breathed out a sentence that landed between my shoulder blades. Money hides sin unless it howls. The woman next to her made a sound in her throat that failed to become a laugh. I kept my eyes on the hymn numbers. 108, 214, 301. If I counted long enough, maybe the counting would turn into courage. The baby shifted under my hand, a small turn like a fish beneath the surface. I'm here, I told both of us, so quietly the wood might have heard it before anyone else did. The pew in front of me held a family I half knew from the market, a toddler with a cowlick, a father who wore his ball cap till the last possible second. The mother lifted her child and set him on her lap, shielding his face from me, as if shame could be contagious through a glance. Daniel would be 2 steps away if I called. He'd walk in and fold his arms and dare the whole town to speak. But the town wouldn't need words. It already had a chorus. It had a conductor, too. Dr. Edward Farris, all-pressed suit and polished watch, seated neatly beside the aisle 3 rows from the front, the hospital's golden sun pretending to be God's. He didn't look back at me. Not once. He didn't need to. He had learned how to aim without turning his head. The readings today remind us, Pastor Green went on, that truth stands even when rumor shouts. He didn't look at me either. His voice held steady, but the pause he took was long enough for Hope to step in and ask a question. Was he speaking to me, or for me? And if he was, would it matter? During the offertory, the ushers moved like chess pieces, and the plates moved with them, silver catching bits of Sunday light, catching the edge of someone's diamond, catching my reflection quick as a flicker. The plate approached, passed, and I reached for my wallet before remembering I had left it in the glove compartment. The usher didn't slow. The plate glided by. From behind came a whisper that cut clean. She has plenty to give. What she lacks is shame. I turned then. Slowly, Martha Lee's lips tightened into a line. The woman beside her straightened her blouse, suddenly fascinated by the stitching on her sleeve. The boy who had been watching me earlier dropped his eyes to his shoes. "You've got something to say?" I asked. My voice didn't tremble. It rang a little like glass touched by a spoon. Martha's chin lifted. Some things say themselves, and some people hide behind them. I replied. The woman with the stitched blouse reached for her purse, hands fumbling. Pastor Green's voice kept on like nothing had happened. The way weather keeps on whether you're wet or dry. The final hymn came. People stood. I stood too, the cane tapping the floor. One small sound to compete with the organ. The back of my neck felt hot, like I'd been standing too close to a stove. At the last amen, a current of bodies turned toward the doors, and the church became a funnel of scents. Aftershave, baby powder, coffee on someone's breath. We flowed into the aisle together, but not together. Not with me. Outside, the sky had turned a blue you only get when the air is thin and honest. The bell gave one more note before falling quiet. Thor perked up as soon as he saw me. He always does, like I'm the only image his eyes were made to hold. Daniel was beside him, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets, jaw clenched hard enough to make a muscle jump. He looked past me, over my shoulder, the way men do when they're trying to measure a threat. "Ready?" he asked. "Not yet," I said, though I was already tired enough to sit on the steps and fall asleep with my head on the rail. People gathered in clusters on the lawn. Ladies with casserole carriers discussed who would bring what to the Wednesday supper. Men compared fishing spots and football schedules. None of them came close, but none of them left either. The space they made around me had a shape. It had edges. Farris emerged last. Of course. He shook the pastor's hand and drew Pastor Green a fraction nearer with his left hand, a gesture that looked like friendship and felt like possession. He laughed low at something Green said, then placed a palm over his tie, smoothing nothing. His gaze drifted across the lawn and never quite arrived at me. Features arranged in a face you might trust if you didn't know better. Daniel's shoulder tensed. "Don't," I said, more plea than command. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. He lives in my breath now. The babies do too, Lila and Thomas, names already carved into my mouth, even though they weren't out in the air yet. The scan had found the wrong thing at the worst time, and Farris had announced it like a weather report. A mass, aggressive, treatment urgent. His hospital, his smile, his knife. A little girl in a yellow dress skipped near Thor and stopped as if she'd crossed a line no one else could see. "He's big," she said. "He thinks he's small," I replied, "and he thinks I'm bigger than I am." Her mother swooped in, lifted the girl away, and turned her body between us like a fence. "Come on, Gracie, don't get near." Her words died where she left them. Near what? Near truth? Near the thing that scared her more than a shadow ever could. I stepped down one stair, then another. The cane found the groove worn by 100 Sundays. Thor pressed close, a warm wall. Daniel reached out a hand without looking like he was reaching. As we reached the bottom, Farris moved 2 degrees, a half turn, and that was enough to make the whole crowd take a long, invisible breath. "Mrs. Ashford," he said, finally giving me the gift of his attention. Every conversation within 20 feet faded, as if someone had turned a dial. "Doctor." I kept my chin level. In the reflection on his sunglasses, I could see the church framed in miniature, a safe little building where safe little people sang safe little songs while carving each other up with forks they kept in their pockets. He slid the glasses off and hooked them into his breast pocket. "I do hope you're feeling well. The unusual nature of your case demands vigilance." "Vigilance," I repeated. "Is that what you call it?" Because it felt a lot like theater from where I was lying. His smile faltered 1/10 of an inch. "We all want what's best for the children." "Name them," I said before I knew I was going to say it. He blinked. "I beg your." "Name the best thing you want for them," I said. "Since you said the word we." The muscle in Daniel's jaw jumped again. Pastor Green shifted on the steps, like he'd been reminded of a pebble in his shoe. "Martha," Lee whispered to someone with her whole body. Farris adjusted his tie. Exactly the kind of detail he'd train on if the cameras were rolling. Health, of course. A path free from speculation. The pause he wrapped around speculation was colder than the silver buckles on his cuffs. I let the silence stand upright between us. Thor breathed slow at my knee. "You can tell a lot about a person by whether they look at a dog's eyes or teeth." Farris looked at neither. He looked at his own reflection in the church window behind me, then stopped feeding it. I said, my voice was steady. My hands weren't. "If you want their lives to be quiet, stop using mine as a headline." Something moved behind his eyes. An annoyance counted and filed. He looked past me to the people who'd chosen to stand within earshot, a dozen faces pretending to be elsewhere while hanging on every syllable. "He's playing to them," I thought. "So play back." "Do you know what it's like?" I asked, not him, not them, but the afternoon itself, to have strangers build a story around your body like scaffolding and then charge rent to watch you fall? The lawn stiffened. A cardinal landed on the power line above us, bright and defiant. Wind ran its fingers through the sycamores lining Maple Street. Somewhere a screen door snapped shut with the sound of a decision. "Selene," Daniel said, soft enough to stitch me to the ground. "I will not be erased by a rumor." I said, "I will not be rewritten by a man who smiles for a living." I looked straight at Farris, then at the circle of listeners who pretended not to be one. "You want a spectacle? Fine. Watch me stand." And I did, feet planted on Ravenhill's church lawn, Sunday shoes biting, cane anchored, hand on the life I was carrying. My father's voice echoed from last night. "This name is a house, girl. Don't burn it down." And something inside me answered back, "Then maybe you should have built it on rock." Farris's lips parted like he might say my name again. Scold it, catalog it, tame it. But before he could, the church bell chimed once in the still air, an extra note that didn't belong. It startled us all enough to show the truth on our faces. Fear in some, hunger in others, and in mine, a clarity that tasted like steel. "Come on," Daniel said. This time as a promise, not a question. He stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the heat of him at my side. Thor leaned his weight into my leg, choosing me again with the simple certainty dogs have. The baby rolled, slow and sure, like a tide at my ribs. We began to walk. One step, another, across the grass that had been trampled 1,000 Sundays and would be trampled 1,000 more. People shifted to let us through. No one touched me. Some stared, so hard it left a bruise. Some looked at the ground like the grass had secrets. And they were trying to listen. Martha Lee spoke, finally, loud enough for everyone to hear. And I could tell she'd been saving it. "Money can buy silence," she said, "but it can't buy respect." I stopped, turned, let the quiet inflate around us until it had a shape of its own. "No," I said, "respect is earned when you keep standing after the lie." The cardinal launched from the wire, a red flare against the clean blue. I felt Daniel's hand hover just behind my elbow, ready, not controlling. Farris watched me the way a man watches a storm rolling toward a crop he's staked his fortune on, calculating what might be saved and what must be sacrificed. And that was when the thought came, sudden and precise, sliding into place like a key. If they need me broken to feel right, then my breath is rebellion. "Let's go home," I told Daniel. "We have to write a list for the week. Diapers, applesauce, batteries for the nursery monitor." The normal words felt like a rope tossed across a river. "Applesauce," he said, as if I'd named a miracle. "Yes," I said, and smiled without apology. "And cinnamon, the good kind." We moved toward the sidewalk. The crowd parted in reluctant, ragged halves. I could taste their doubt, their curiosity, their need. The bell was done, ringing. The sun had moved an inch down the sky, and the afternoon smelled like cut grass and coffee left too long on a hot plate. Behind me, Farris spoke one more time, not loud, but pointed, the kind of words that were meant to follow you home and sit at your table until you offered them a chair. "Mrs. Ashford," he said, "the unusual always wants an audience. Be careful what you feed." I didn't turn. I gave my reply to the street itself, to the mailbox with a dent from some long-ago baseball, to the kid on a bike who'd slowed to watch. "I'm done feeding anything that starves me." The cane kissed the concrete. Thor's nails clicked a rhythm beside it. Daniel's stride matched mine. And yet, with each step, I could feel the rumor lingering like a storm that hadn't spent itself, like heat that stays in the road long after sunset. Somewhere in the distance, an ambulance wailed and then grew small, a thin thread pulled into the hills. What will they say tonight when the porch lights come on and the crickets start up? What will Farris decide he can do with a woman who refuses to bow? How much does a lie weigh when you refuse to carry it? I don't know yet, but the sound of my own breath, slow, stubborn, unpaid for, kept time as we crossed Maple Street. And in that rhythm, there was a promise I hadn't dared make until now. I will stand tomorrow, too. And the day after that. And the day after that, if I have to, unless something happens first. The house looked like it was made of light and glass, perched at the top of Raven Hill like it didn't care who watched. From the outside, it was perfect, clean lines, tall windows spilling fire from the evening sun. But inside, the air was thick enough to cut. I stood barefoot on the hardwood floor, my palm resting on the massive head of Thor. his dark eyes following every movement of mine, as if he knew I was one breath away from breaking. His body pressed against my leg, warm, steady, and silent. Daniel couldn't be silent. He was a storm pacing from wall to wall, boots leaving invisible tracks across the polished wood. His shoulders were tense, fists clenching and unclenching like he was fighting ghosts he couldn't punch. The anger in him wasn't just about the town. It was about me, about the way I kept swallowing their poison and refusing to spit it back. "They're choking on lies," he said, his voice rough with fury. "Let them choke. You're carrying our children. Selene, ours." I wanted to believe the word. Ours could shield me. I wanted it to be armor. But the truth was, every time I closed my eyes, I still heard the whispers. Not just from church, not just from the market. Everywhere, the cruel laughter had followed me up this hill, lodged itself into the corners of this house like mold. I stroked Thor's head, letting his steady breathing fill the silence Daniel couldn't keep. His ears flicked once, like he'd heard something I hadn't. Maybe he had. He was always faster to sense danger, faster to sense weakness. "You think it doesn't matter?" I said quietly, finally breaking the wall of his anger. "You think I can walk through that town with my head high, and it won't poison our children's lives?" Daniel stopped, his boots scuffed against the floor, his chest heaving. He looked at me as if he wanted to argue, but the words froze in his throat. He dragged a hand over his face, the stubble rasping against his palm. "It matters because you believe it matters," he said, softer now, his rage burning down to embers. "If you give them your fear, Selene, they've already won." I hated that he was right. And yet, how could I not fear? These people weren't just strangers on sidewalks. They were the same ones who'd sit on the school board, who'd hire or fire, who'd decide with a smile whether my children were invited in or kept out. Their judgment was a net, waiting for us to fall. I turned toward the wall of glass, where the valley stretched wide beneath us. From here, Raven Hill looked small, almost harmless. Smoke curled from chimneys. Cars moved like toys on Main Street. But I knew better. That valley carried every whisper like a drumbeat. Thor pressed closer to me, his massive frame anchoring me as if he could hold back the world with muscle and loyalty alone. I bent down and kissed the ridge of his head, the rough fur brushing my lips. "You'd protect them even if I can't, wouldn't you?" His tail flicked once against the floor, steady as a heartbeat. Daniel came up behind me, then, his reflection merging with mine in the glass. He rested a hand on my shoulder, heavy and shaking, and for the first time that day, I felt the crack in him too. "I can't lose you," he whispered. The valley lights began to glow, one by one, like eyes opening in the dark. And in their glow, I felt the weight of the choice that was already waiting for me, crouched in the shadows of hospital corridors and clean white papers with black words I didn't want to read. The glass before me reflected all of us, me, the man who would burn for me, and the dog who would die for me. And still, the question that burned hottest was the one no one dared to ask aloud. When the lies finish their feast, what will be left of me to give to the truth? The first thing I notice is the clock, red digits pinned to the wall like a threat. 6:58 p.m. The boardroom door shuts behind me with a sound that feels final. Fluorescent light hums overhead. Coffee breath and disinfectant wrestle in the air. Someone has left a paper plate of grocery store donuts on the sideboard. The glaze has turned to a thin skin, puckered like a lie left too long in the open. Mrs. Ashford, Dr. Edward Farris says, already standing, already smiling. His tie is the color of a fresh bruise. Thank you for coming on such short notice. He touches the back of a chair as if he's pulling it out for me, but he doesn't actually move it. I have to tug the leg myself. A few nurses sit opposite, hands folded, name tags flashing under the harsh light. 2 board members I've seen in the paper, one with a flag lapel pin, the other with a lawyer's posture, whisper to each other and stop when I look up. A screen on the far wall shows the hospital's logo and a blue background that looks like it wants to be tranquil and fails. I set my cane against the edge of the table and lower myself into the chair. The baby tilts inside me. Small tide, stubborn moon. I flatten my palm over the movement and hold my face still. I know what they came to see. I won't give it to them. Where's my husband? I ask. In the hall. Farris replies, soft as a cushion. We'll bring him in shortly. We'd like to clarify a few clinical points first. For everyone's peace of mind. Peace of mind. I let the phrase sit in the middle of the table, bright as a blade. He clicks a remote. The logo vanishes. A scan appears. My scan? Washed in grayscale, corners stamped with my last name, and the date like a receipt. A hush rolls through the room that doesn't feel like respect. It feels like appetite. As you can see, he begins, tone-pitched for the recording device that I'm sure is somewhere on this table. Our patient presents with a complex obstetric status compounded by a rapidly proliferating mass. Given the unusual features, I convened this advisory to ensure we are aligned on a cautious path forward. Unusual, cautious. He decorates his sentences with warning labels and then sells them as gifts. He moves a red dot over the image. The light trembles just a fraction. Enough to remind me he has blood in him, after all. Here, he says, and here, secondary markers we don't typically observe. He glances up, meets the room's eyes without ever quite meeting mine, which raises questions. The nurse at the far end, a woman with a knotted bun and a nervous habit of rolling her pen between her fingers, shoots me a quick look that says, I'm sorry I'm here. Next to her, the charge nurse from labor and delivery. Sonia, lipstick daring, eyes sharp, doesn't look sorry for anything. She sits with her spine straight, like a lighthouse that decided to learn how to move. What questions? I ask. My voice sounds even. I'm proud of that. Inside, I'm lining up every piece of me that might try to bolt. Farris steeples his fingers. Outliers in serum profiles. Contaminants in the initial sample. Anomalies in the immunoblot that, frankly, we don't routinely see in a case like yours. He turns the words like they're gems. It may be nothing. It may be significant. The town has taken an interest. There it is. The hallway opens, and the roomer walks in wearing his suit. Doctor, Sonia says, her voice clean as a bell. With respect, if this is about the patient's care, let's keep it clinical. If this is about what's being said downtown, I can turn on the radio and save us all an hour. The lawyer posture board member bristles. Flag pin clears his throat. Farris doesn't turn to either of them. He keeps his focus divided, like a man who knows where every camera is. Of course, clinical, which is why I must raise the possibility of an atypical etiology. I stare at him until the edges of the screen blur. Use a word we can live with. I say, start there. He sighs, just enough for the microphone that might be somewhere to catch it. Cross-species contamination in the lab. He says, finally, or environmental exposure we haven't identified. It would be irresponsible not to mention it. To you, to the board. Somewhere down the hall, a cart rattles and squeaks. The smell of bleach grows stronger and then fades. I picture the ER techs I've known since high school, the way they move fast without making a show of it, hands steady at 3 a.m. I picture my father's face at his desk last night, the way he covered his eyes with his thumb and forefinger like he could pinch disappointment at the root. Cross-species, I repeat, tasting every letter. What animal are we pretending we mean? Doctor? A few eyes drop to the tabletop. Sonia doesn't blink. The lawyer folds his hands as if in prayer. The clock clicks to 7:05 with a small electric hiccup. Farris gives me the kind of smile a person uses to sell something that's going to break. We don't speculate. We observe. We document. And we protect the hospital from undue liability while we do so. There it is again. The invisible choir he keeps in his pocket. You mean protect yourself? I say. He tilts his head, a gesture rehearsed so long it looks natural. I mean protect care pathways for mother and infants in a context of public scrutiny. We're a regional facility, Mrs. Ashford. Our reputation isn't an ornament, it's infrastructure. And I'm a road you can drive your reputation on, I answer, until it gets you where you wanted to go. Something flares in his eyes. Annoyance, then calculation covering it like a coat. He taps the remote. A chart replaces the scan. Numbers, p-values, lines that might as well be fences. We recommend initiating treatment for the mass immediately, he says, turning his voice softer. A hand on a shoulder he hasn't earned. Delaying increases maternal risk. You understand that? Yes. You told the town I'm an outlier. I say, now you want me to be textbook. I told the town nothing. He replies, injury curling at the edge of the words. People talk. We do medicine. Sonia's pen stops rolling. Respectfully, she says, someone talked to someone. The rumor didn't invent itself with vocabulary we don't use on Main Street. The flag pin board member shifts, irritated by the word rumor itself, as if language is the part that offends him. We are drifting, he says. Focus, risk mitigation, plan. Plan, my baby's kick. And for a beat the room recedes. I hear the whir of the ancient HVAC, the tinny squeak of the dry erase marker. When the lawyer writes a word he doesn't intend to remember after tonight. I see the coffee ring on the table near Farris's elbow, a dark halo anchoring his cup. I fix my eyes there, at the stain. Everything else can move. The stain stays. What is the actual plan? I ask if I choose them first. A beat, 2. He lets the silence widen, then steps into it like a man crossing a stage. We bring you in twice weekly for fetal monitoring, he says, voice so gentle it cuts. We manage pain. We watch the mass. If we see progression that endangers viability, we act. If we see fetal distress, we act. If we see you slipping away, we act faster. And if I don't come in at all, I ask. A murmur runs around the table and dies. The lawyer's pen hesitates above the pad. The clock blinks 7:08, impartial as weather. You will come, Farris says softer still, because you love those children more than you hate me. He thinks he's won by saying that out loud. He thinks the moral high ground belongs to anyone who can say the word love without choking on it. A knock at the door. It opens a fraction. Daniel's face in the gap. Jaw set, eyes tracking me like a searchlight. Behind him, Thor's outline sits at the end of the hall, an unmoving dark at knee height. The boardroom inhales. There's a posted sign. No animals beyond this point, tacked slightly crooked. And I can feel the heat of the judgment aimed at the shape in the hallway that has kept me from cracking. 5 minutes, Farris says without looking at the door. He doesn't need to. We'll be done. Sonia stands. Not a flinch, not a sound from her chair. We're done now, she says. The patient has questions, and none of them will be answered by showing her own scans to a room that isn't here to care for her. Sit down, the lawyer says automatically, like the phrase jumped off a page and into his mouth. No, she replies, and the word has weight. If we're using her name, she stays. If we're using her body, she leads. Farris gives a small, courtly bow that is neither small nor courtly. Nurse Alvarez, we appreciate your passion, but process is not a shield for cruelty. Sonia says, or for hints you can later claim you didn't make. The flag pin glints. Let the doctor finish. I stand, slow, the chair scraping back with a sound I intend to remember. The cane finds the floor with a click that seems to start at my hand and finish somewhere deep in the building's bones. He already has, I say. He finished the day he decided cross species would do more for him than contamination in the lab. Farris lifts his chin a fraction. He looks at me the way he looked at the scan, like a problem to be annotated. Mrs. Ashford, he says, voice dipped in sympathy's varnish, it's unusual for a case like yours. We should be cautious. Then be cautious with your words. I say, your scalpel has a cap. Your mouth doesn't. For the first time, he blinks hard. His hand lands on the coffee cup and misses the ring by an inch. The nurse with the knotted bun exhales, a sound barely there, like relief that's afraid to be caught. The lawyer caps his pen more loudly than anyone needs to, a gentleman's way of slamming a door. Flagpin adjusts his jacket, as if order were a garment he can pull on. Sonia moves to the door and opens it fully. Daniel steps in without waiting to be asked. He doesn't say a word. He doesn't have to. He takes the chair I left and spins it toward me, so that if I fall forward. Thor stays in the hall, a sentry at the line. None of us agreed on, but all of us feel. Farris clears his throat. I'll circulate a summary of recommendations, he says to the room, already cutting me out of the sentence. We'll reconvene in 48 hours to finalize. Send it to me. I say, directly. No filters. No waiting for someone else to translate my life into bullet points. Of course, he replies. The smile is back, polished until I can see the overhead light in it. We're all on the same side. Name it, I say. Pardon? Name the side. He waits a heartbeat too long. In that small gap, every mask he owns slides a fraction and shows me the cost of holding it up. The side of safety, he says, landing on a word no one can argue with and no one can measure. We're released without being dismissed. That's how power works here. You're never told to leave. You're simply given a room you can't breathe in and expected to find the door. Out in the corridor, the air is cooler. The lights are dimmer. The scuffed linoleum looks honest after the boardroom's table. Sturdy, a little tired, carrying everyone. Daniel wraps an arm around me in a way that doesn't claim me so much as brace me. "You okay?" He asks, the question a rope. "Define okay," I say, and he almost smiles, which feels like a small victory against something that hates small victories. Sonia slips out behind us, her shoes quiet. She doesn't look at me when she speaks. She stares down the hallway like it might try something. "You didn't hear this from me," she says, voice low, but the lab flagged the 10 a.m. samples for chain of custody irregularities. Label print times don't match intake logs. I turn, the floor tilting just enough to make Thor rise. Irregularities, I repeat. Errors, or hands where they shouldn't have been. She says, if someone wanted a narrative more than they wanted accuracy, a printer clock is a weak link. Daniel's jaw tightens until a muscle in his cheek jumps. Who touched it? Sonia finally looks at me. "The system says nobody," she answers, which is exactly when you know somebody did. A stretcher rolls past at the far end, a paramedic walking backward, talking to the patient in a voice that could carry a person across a flood. Somewhere, a child cries once and then swallows it, the way children do when they learn too young that the world likes them quiet. I feel the babies shift again. I press my palm down, firm to firm, out of the corner of my eye. I catch movement through the small square window set into the boardroom door. Farris stands alone in there now, head bent to his phone, the halo of the screen lighting the bottom half of his face. For a moment, he looks like any man at work too late, tired, efficient, important. Then he lifts his eyes and meets mine through the glass with a look that says, "I didn't win tonight. I will win later." He slips the phone into his pocket and straightens his tie, as if ceremony can make truth sit up straighter. How far would he go? Daniel asks under his breath. "As far as the town lets him." I say, "As far as fear pays." We start down the corridor together, the three of us moving at a pace that tells the building we are not running. The elevator dings and opens its bright metal mouth. Somewhere down the hall, a printer kicks on, its gears clicking, its little green light doing exactly what it was told to do. What happens to a lie when you staple it to a chart? What happens to a life when the person holding the pen decides how your story should sound? The doors slide shut. The elevator drops 1 floor, 2, 3, soft shutters like a heartbeat under a heavy blanket. By the time it opens on the ground level, I have a plan that is not fully a plan, a truth that has not yet found its proof, and 2 small lives tapping out a code against my ribs, as if they already know the language this town demands. The lobby doors part. Night reaches in. Cool fingers on a warm face. Out on the curb, someone laughs too loudly. An ambulance idles, lights spinning without siren. A carnival no one asked for. Thor falls into step beside me. The sign above us stating again in black letters what is not allowed. Things the sign can police, things it cannot. I adjust my grip on the cane and look back through the glass. The boardroom is empty now. The screen is dark. The coffee ring remains, a small brown planet circling in absence. I wonder who will wipe it away first. I wonder what else vanishes that easily. I wonder how long until the printer spits out a version of me that a man like Farris can live with, and who will believe it when it lands on the table with everyone's fingerprints but mine. The dining room felt colder than the November night outside. A chandelier of cut crystals spilled a brittle light across the table, glinting on glasses no one touched and silverware no one dared to lift. The mahogany stretched long between us, polished so clean I could see my own face warped in its surface, pale, tired, carrying too much weight for one body. At the far end sat Richard Ashford, my father, the man who built half the valley and believed the other half owed him gratitude. His hair had gone to silver, combed with military precision, and his tailored suit looked more like armor than clothing. He wasn't eating. He never came here to eat. Daniel sat beside me, posture stiff, eyes locked on the glass of water in front of him, as if sheer focus could keep him from exploding. His jaw flexed every few seconds, that familiar storm brewing behind his teeth. He hated this room more than I did. But for me, this table was a battlefield scarred with memories. Every time I had dared speak, every time I had been told my voice didn't carry weight enough to stand on its own. My father leaned back in his chair, fingers pressed together like a steeple. His gaze moved from me to Daniel and back again. Our name built this town, he said, each word heavy, deliberate. And you, his eyes burned into mine, you're dragging it through the mud. The silence that followed was so thick, I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator 2 rooms away. Daniel's hand tightened around mine under the table, a secret grip that both steadied me and warned me, don't break here, not in front of him. I lifted my chin. The town chose to believe a lie. That's on them, not me. Perception, Richard cut in, his voice sharp as glass, is more powerful than truth. And perception says my daughter is weak, foolish enough to let gossip define her. My throat tightened, but I refused to give him the tremor he wanted. Weakness would have been hiding. I walked into that church knowing every eye was waiting to carve me apart. That isn't weakness. He slammed his palm against the table. The crystal rang like it might shatter. Strength isn't defiance for its own sake. Strength is control, discipline, knowing when to fight and when to keep quiet. Daniel finally spoke, his voice low but steady. With respect, sir, she doesn't need a lecture on control. She needs her father to stand beside her, not above her. Richard turned slowly, a predator sizing up prey. And you think you're the man to do that? A mechanic with grease under his nails, swaggering into my house like you belong at this table. Daniel's chair scraped back an inch. His voice was steel now. I belong anywhere Selene does. My father gave a dry laugh, cold enough to frost the windows. That's what scares me. He looked back at me. He'll drag you down with him. He'll let pride be your compass. And pride has never built an empire. It destroys one. My breath caught. Pride. Empire. Words he threw like bricks, forgetting I wasn't stone, forgetting I was flesh and bone carrying 2 fragile lives inside me. Stop measuring me by what I can build for you. I said, louder than I meant to, the words echoing in the chandelier glass. You think empire matters more than love? Than survival? The air shifted then. Something unseen, something dangerous. Richard's eyes narrowed. His voice dropped to a growl, soft but more threatening than a shout. If you let weakness consume you, if you let him, he nodded at Daniel, dictate your future, you won't just lose yourself, you'll lose those children. And when you do, don't expect this family name to shield you. The words hit like a whip. Daniel started to rise, fury blazing in his eyes, but I squeezed his hand, keeping him in his seat. I wouldn't let my father see us break together. You call it weakness, I said, locking my gaze on Richard. But maybe what you fear is a kind of strength you don't recognize, one you can't control. The crystal chandelier swayed, slightly above us, though no draft moved the air. It was as if the house itself shivered at the words. My father stood, pushing his chair back with a screech that scratched through the room. He placed both palms flat on the table and leaned forward. His face was close enough now that I could see the thin network of lines etched deep by decades of scowls and half-smiles. You think love will save you? He said. Love won't silence a town. Love won't cure a disease eating you from the inside. Love won't bury the shame. Daniel's voice was steady fire. Maybe not, but love is the only reason she's still standing. And maybe that terrifies you more than losing your empire. The words hung there, suspended, daring my father to strike with something sharper. He didn't. Instead, he straightened, adjusted his cufflinks, and turned toward the darkened hallway without another word. The mahogany table between us felt like a coffin, closing in on everything we hadn't said. Daniel let go of my hand, only to wrap his arm around my shoulders, pulling me against him. For the first time that night, I let my body lean, if only for a second. The chandelier kept trembling above, scattering fractured light across the table, across my father's empty chair, across the reflection of my face still warped in the wood. And in that reflection, one question pulsed louder than the silence. If a name can build a town, what will it take to burn one down? The square was alive with sound, the kind that fills the air so thick it feels like it could choke you. Saturday morning in Raven Hill always smelled of fried dough, wood smoke, and fresh hay dragged in on boots. Children darted between stalls, laughing with mouths stained red from strawberry ice pops, and old men tipped their hats over baskets of apples. It should have felt like belonging. Instead, it felt like walking into a pit of eyes. Every step I took pressed into the cobblestones, louder than it should have. I could feel them watching. The baker pausing mid-slice with his bread knife, the woman selling sunflowers turning her head so sharply a petal fell to the ground. Conversations bent, reshaped, ended halfway through sentences. The market didn't need silence to make a point. It had eyes, and eyes were sharper than knives. Thor walked beside me, his massive body close to my thigh, the leash heavy in my hand. His head was high, ears pricked, each step deliberate, like he knew exactly what I was walking into. Children pointed and whispered, fingers curled into their mother's skirts, as if a black dog could be guilty of the same rumor that clung to me like ash. Halfway down the row of stalls, a woman in a denim jacket stopped square in front of me. She spat at the cobblestones, close enough that the warm fleck touched the hem of my dress. My heart lurched, but I didn't stop. Thor growled, low, a sound like a storm rising out of the ground. The woman flinched, but she didn't move. She just watched me, with the flat satisfaction of someone who wanted me to see the weight of her contempt. I stepped past her, without a word. My fingers ached from gripping the leash too tight, my breath hot in my throat. I knew if I spoke, it would be too much, or not enough. Look, a boy's voice giggled from somewhere near the honey stand. That's her. That's the one with the... He cut himself off when his father shot him a warning glance. But the damage was already done. The word hung there unsaid, thick as smoke. The farmer selling sweet corn leaned on his stall, his voice pitched just loud enough for me to hear as I passed. "Money can buy silence," he said, eyes hard as nails, "but not respect." I stopped. For a second, the air itself seemed to lean closer, waiting for what I would do. My chest tightened. I wanted to scream, to let the pain roll out of me like fire. But instead, I turned and met his stare head-on. My voice came out steady, though I felt the quake in my bones. "Respect isn't for sale," I said. "It's what you give when you see someone refuse to crawl." A few people shifted, uncomfortably. A man coughed. Somewhere, a baby cried, as if to remind everyone what innocence really sounded like. Thor pressed against me, anchoring me as the crowd's eyes bore into my back. I walked on, past the fried dough stand, past the barrels of apples, past the stall where someone was selling quilts stitched with Bible verses. Every inch of me wanted to fold under the weight, but my feet kept moving. And with each step, a question burned louder in my mind. How much of yourself do you lose when you stop defending it? The market didn't answer. It never would. But I felt it, each stare, each whisper, trying to strip something from me. And all I could do was keep walking, one step after another, daring them to see that I hadn't fallen yet. Still, I couldn't shake the thought. If a town can turn its market into a courtroom, what verdict will they deliver when the real trial comes? The corridor smelled of bleach and rain-soaked air, a mixture that made the back of my throat ache. Dawn pressed pale against the tall hospital windows, drops streaking down the glass like the sky itself was bleeding slowly. The world was just waking, but here, in this place, time didn't move with the sun. It moved with machines, test results, and words you couldn't take back once they left someone's mouth. I sat on the cold plastic chair, both hands wrapped around my stomach, as if that would anchor me. Daniel paced like a man locked in a cage, his boots striking the linoleum floor, steady and angry. Every turn he made drew him closer to the swinging doors at the end of the hall, where nurses pushed carts and whispered in clipped tones, and then farther from me, as if even he couldn't decide whether to fight or flee. The nurse appeared first, a young woman with trembling hands clutching a manila folder. She looked too fragile to be the bearer of anything final, yet her face already said what her mouth hadn't dared. She glanced at me, then Daniel, and then froze when another set of footsteps entered the corridor. Dr. Edward Farris. His suit was dark, immaculate, as though the dawn's wetness hadn't touched him. He walked with that careful rhythm of someone who believed every eye should already be watching him. And they were. Even the rain outside seemed to hesitate, slowing against the glass. The nurse extended the folder toward him, her knuckles white. He didn't take it at first. He let her hand hang in the air long enough for it to hurt, then accepted it with a nod that looked like mercy, but wasn't. "Mrs. Ashford," he said, smooth as a sermon. "Daniel." My husband stopped pacing, his chest rising and falling too fast. "Say it." Daniel snapped. "Stop circling. Say it." Farris opened the folder. Paper whispered, crisp, final. His eyes scanned the page, though I knew he had already memorized the lines before stepping out here. He wanted to perform it. He wanted the sting of his words to land exactly where he placed them. He closed the folder softly, the way a priest might close a Bible after last rites. Then he looked at me. "Your body is fighting two battles," he said, each word carved carefully, and it cannot win both. The hallway groaned with silence. Somewhere a machine beeped behind a door, quick and panicked, then went quiet. My hand pressed harder against the life inside me, as if pressure could protect. "What do you mean?" I asked, though the weight in my chest already knew. Farris gestured lightly with the folder. "The pregnancy is high risk." "Yes, but the scans show a mass, aggressive, unrelenting. It isn't waiting. You cannot treat both conditions at once without consequence. A choice will be necessary." "A choice?" My voice cracked, sharp against the corridor. Between my children and myself? His lips pressed into something that wanted to look like sympathy, but couldn't hide its satisfaction. "We recommend immediate treatment for the tumor. Delay could be catastrophic for you." Daniel's fists curled at his sides, his voice breaking like glass. "So you're asking her to sacrifice our children to save herself? You call that medicine?" Farris tilted his head, unbothered. "I call it reality." The nurse beside him shifted, her eyes darting toward me, almost pleading, as if she wanted me to know she hadn't chosen this message, only carried it. She looked like she might speak, but Farris's presence smothered her into silence. I drew in a shaky breath, and if I refused treatment, Farris didn't blink. "Then the mass will spread. You'll have weeks, maybe months, perhaps long enough for the fetuses to mature, but at a cost, a steep one." Daniel took a step forward, his voice low and shaking with rage. "You talk like she's already a corpse. She's not. She's here. And those are our children." For the first time, Farris allowed a smile, faint and poisonous. "Sometimes hope is just another form of denial. Mr. Whitaker, denial doesn't change blood work." The rain hit the glass harder, like the sky itself wanted to drown his words out. My body felt split in two, half consumed by terror, half burning with defiance. A tumor, a pregnancy, two wars inside me, each demanding I pick a side. I looked down at the floor tiles, cracked near the wall, where years of stretchers had carved their path. How many lives had begun and ended in this building while no one outside even noticed? And now it was me, my babies, my body, my choice, if it could even be called that. Farris stepped closer, his voice soft, almost tender. "Selene, you must decide soon. Delay is not kindness. It is surrender." My throat ached. I wanted to scream, to throw the folder against the rain-slick window, to ask God why a woman should be made to choose between her own life and the ones she had not even held yet. But all I managed was a whisper, raw and sharp. "I will not bury them to save myself." Daniel's hand found mine instantly, gripping tight, grounding me in the storm. His eyes glistened, but his jaw stayed firm. Farris only nodded once, like a man noting a failed experiment. He turned to leave, his polished shoes clicking down the hall. The nurse lingered, her lips parting as if she wanted to offer comfort, but no words came. She followed him reluctantly, her steps uneven. The rain outside thickened, streaks running fast like veins down the glass. Daniel knelt in front of me, his hands pressed over mine, his forehead touching my belly. He didn't speak because there were no words left that could fix what had been spoken. And in the silence, one question rose like a scream that wouldn't fade. If love is the only weapon I have, how do I use it against something already growing inside me. The moonlight came through the wide bedroom window in fractured silver lines, painting the sheets white and cold, as if the night itself had decided to lay beside me. My body felt heavier than the bed could hold, the air pressing down on my chest, each breath shallow and hard to trust. The doctor's words still clung to the walls like a stain I couldn't scrub out. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, his face buried in his hands. He wasn't crying, not out loud, but his shoulders betrayed him. Shaking with a rhythm he couldn't stop, Thor lay stretched across the floorboards near the door, ears perked, restless, his breathing matching the tension in the room. I turned my face toward the ceiling, the moonlight cutting across my skin, and whispered the question I hadn't been able to stop asking myself since Farris had spoken it into the corridor. Am I the battlefield? The sheets were damp with tears I hadn't noticed spilling until Daniel's weight sank beside me. His arms went around me suddenly, fierce, like he was afraid I might dissolve if he didn't hold me tight enough. Selene, his voice broke, hoarse like sandpaper. Don't do this to yourself. Don't do this to us. They can treat it. They can fight it. If you let them start now, you can live. You can stay. The word stay cracked something deep inside me. I wanted to promise it, wanted to give him that certainty. But when I pressed my palm to my belly, I felt the flutter, small, fragile, undeniable, and I knew I couldn't. They told us the truth, I said, my voice low but steady. If I take the treatment now, it could take them. And if I wait, I swallowed hard, the words cutting my throat. If I wait, it could take me. Daniel pulled back enough to look at me, his eyes wet and furious. Don't you dare talk like you've already made your peace. Don't you dare choose death while I'm still here fighting for you. I can't lose you, Selene. Not like this. I cupped his face in my hands, feeling the stubble against my palms. Memorizing the heat of him in case memory was all I'd have. If I must choose, I whispered, every syllable tasting like blood and devotion, I choose them, every time. He shook his head violently, as if he could throw the words out of existence. Don't say that. Don't. You don't understand what you're asking me to live with, to watch you fade while I hold 2 children who'll never know the sound of your laugh. You think that's mercy? That's cruelty. His pain carved me open, but the truth had already rooted inside me. No, I said, voice breaking, cruelty would be letting them vanish before they even take their first breath. Cruelty would be ending them, so I could stay. I couldn't look at them with that on my conscience. I couldn't live if it meant they never did. Daniel's fists hit the mattress, once, twice, the sound like muffled thunder. He leaned forward, his forehead pressed against mine, his breath shaking into me. You're asking me to watch you die. I'm asking you to let me be their mother. I answered, even if it's the only thing I get to be. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of the things neither of us could say. His body trembled against mine, and I knew he was carrying a rage he couldn't throw at anyone. Not at me, not at the doctors, not even at God. Thor shifted on the floor, a low rumble in his chest, as though he sensed the weight pressing on us both. The moon slid higher, casting longer shadows, and I thought of all the nights ahead, nights I might never see, nights Daniel might spend holding the children alone. I pressed my hand to my stomach again, feeling the faint rhythm inside. Tiny lives demanding nothing but the chance to exist. How could I deny them that, even if it meant denying myself tomorrow? Daniel's voice was barely a whisper now, raw and broken. I don't know how to stand in a world without you. I kissed the space just beneath his eye, where salt had dried on his skin. Then don't stand alone. I said, stand for them. Stand for us. The window rattled softly as the wind shifted outside. Somewhere in the distance, the church bell marked midnight, each toll carrying the weight of a countdown we hadn't chosen. And as the sound faded into the quiet, one thought remained, pulsing louder than the blood in my ears. If love demands the unthinkable, can it still save what it leaves behind? The cafeteria lights buzzed overhead, that tired fluorescent hum that made even fresh coffee taste bitter. Plastic trays clattered, chairs scraped the linoleum, and the smell was a strange marriage of burned bacon and disinfectant. I had come down here looking for quiet, a place where I could force myself to eat something while Daniel argued with the billing office upstairs. But quiet wasn't what I found. At the far corner, framed by a machine that hissed stale hot chocolate into paper cups, sat Dr. Edward Farris. His suit looked out of place in this room of scrubs and cafeteria aprons, dark, immaculate, a color that drank the light instead of reflecting it. Around him gathered a few nurses, and, most dangerously, Mark Kinley, the reporter from the Ravenhill Ledger, notebook already open, pen tapping like a nervous metronome. I sat down 2 tables away, heart pounding. I knew that look on Farris's face, a softness too polished, a smile that wasn't kindness, but strategy. It was the kind of smile that could slit your throat without spilling a drop of blood. You understand, he began, his voice carrying just enough to reach ears that wanted to listen. Some cases fall outside the boundaries of our textbooks. He let the sentence dangle, spoon stirring his untouched coffee. As if revelation were a flavor he could savor slowly. One of the younger nurses leaned forward, curiosity blooming across her face. What do you mean, Dr. Farris? Outside the textbooks. Farris gave a half laugh, controlled, deliberate. Science can't explain everything. Sometimes the rumors aren't so far from the truth. The words hit the room like a match struck in dry grass. The reporter's pen stilled, then raced across the page. The nurses exchanged glances, gossip already mutating before it even left their mouths. I gripped the edge of my tray until my knuckles ached. My stomach turned, not from hunger, but from the knowledge that this was no accident. He wasn't careless. He was planting seeds, and he knew exactly how fertile this soil was. What kind of rumors? Kinley pressed, eyes bright with the thrill of something scandalous. Farris tilted his head, a surgeon dissecting without a scalpel. Oh, I wouldn't want to spread unverified claims, he said, feigning restraint. But anomalies have been observed. Anomalies that suggest we may not be dealing with a typical pregnancy. The nurses leaned closer, their scrubs whispering as fabric rubbed against fabric. One covered her mouth with her hand, eyes wide, already calculating which friend to call first. I could barely breathe. My pulse thundered in my ears. Every syllable he spoke felt like a nail hammered into my coffin. Kinley smirked, his voice dripping with feigned innocence. So, are you saying the stories out there, that Selene Ashford's condition isn't natural? You're not denying them? Farris paused, long enough for the silence itself to tremble. Then came that smile, thin and poisonous. I'm saying, he replied, that sometimes where there's smoke, there may be more than just fire. There may be truth we simply don't have the tools to recognize yet. The table erupted with murmurs. One nurse gasped. Another shook her head, half shocked, half thrilled. Kinley's pen scratched furiously, capturing the venom word for word. I wanted to scream, to flip the table and shatter the illusion he wore like a mask, but I stayed rooted to my chair, nails biting into the tray, forcing myself to remain unseen. If I spoke, I would only feed his theater. And that was what this was: theater for the weak, performance for the hungry. Thor wasn't with me. He was waiting in the car with Daniel, but I could almost feel his weight against my leg, steadying me in absence. I focused on that phantom pressure, on the thought of his unshakable loyalty, because everything else in this room was betrayal. Farris leaned back in his chair, sipping the coffee that had long gone cold. "Of course," he added smoothly, "discretion is essential. These are sensitive matters. I trust your professionalism." He glanced at the nurses, at Kinley, knowing full well he had just guaranteed the opposite. The reporter closed his notebook with a snap, grinning. "Don't worry, doctor. I'll handle it with care." Care. That word twisted in my chest like a knife. I knew what he meant. Not truth, not mercy, just the kind of care that sells papers and ruins lives. As I rose from my seat, my chair scraped against the linoleum, drawing a few startled looks. Farris glanced at me then, for the first time. His smile didn't falter. It only sharpened, as though he knew I had heard every word. Our eyes locked, and in that moment I understood. He didn't need to destroy me in surgery. He could do it here, with sentences dropped like poison into coffee cups, with rumors dressed as science. I turned and walked out, the buzz of the neon lights still drilling into my skull. And as the cafeteria doors swung shut behind me, one thought burned clear in my mind. How do you fight a man who doesn't kill with his hands, but with his smile? The storm was already building when I stepped out of the hospital doors, the sky painted in bruised shades of gray and purple. The air smelled of iron and wet pavement, thunder rolling somewhere far, but certain, as if the clouds themselves were waiting for the fight they knew was about to erupt. And there he was, Dr. Edward Farris, standing at the edge of the sidewalk beneath the flickering street lamp. His umbrella wasn't open, though fat drops of rain had started to stain the shoulders of his immaculate suit. He didn't seem to care. His posture was calm, deliberate, too composed for a man who had just dismantled my wife's dignity with a handful of words. I didn't remember crossing the distance between us. My boots slapped against the wet concrete, each step louder than the storm. My fists were already clenched, and I could feel blood pulsing behind my eyes. People lingered near the entrance, pretending not to watch, but watching anyway. Nurses, visitors, a few orderlies taking their smoke break. An audience gathering before I even opened my mouth. "Say it again." I growled, my voice low but shaking with fury. "Say her name again. The way you said it in there, like she's some lab case, some rumor for you to feed." Farris tilted his head slightly, that polished smirk stretching his lips, the kind of smile a man wears when he knows he's got the law and the system on his side. "Mr. Whitaker," he said softly, too softly, "I only present facts. It isn't my fault the facts make your wife unusual." The last word slithered from his mouth like venom. My chest exploded with heat. I lunged forward, my hand colliding with his tie, shoving him back against the brick wall. Gasps broke out behind me. A tray of coffee slipped from a nurse's hand and shattered, liquid splashing across the rain-slicked ground. "Say her name again." I roared, my knuckles white on his collar, "and I'll bury your lies in your throat." For a moment, just a moment, the mask cracked. I saw fear flicker in his eyes before pride smothered it. He straightened his spine against the wall, forcing calm into his tone. "Threats won't change her prognosis, or the town's opinion." My fist drew back, rain dripping from my wrist. The crowd behind me murmured, shifting, some whispering my name, others whispering his. And then, security, 2 guards rushed between us, their hands firm on my arms, pulling me back, their voices sharp in my ear. "Sir, let him go. Step back now." I fought against them, my body thrashing like an animal, my teeth clenched around words. I couldn't stop. "You think you can ruin her with a smile and a headline? You think this town belongs to you? Look at me. Farris, look at me when I tell you. You don't get to decide what she is." Farris smoothed his tie with slow precision, like I hadn't nearly struck him, like the chaos around us was nothing more than theater for his benefit. And then he looked at the crowd, not me, his voice perfectly pitched to carry. "This," he said, gesturing to me with an almost casual flick of his hand, "is what desperation looks like." The words cut deeper than fists. People shifted, some nodding, some staring at me with pity or disdain. The storm cracked overhead, lightning splitting the sky. The guards released me only when Daniel Kinley, the journalist, lifted his pen, scribbling furiously, his grin wide, as if he had just caught the story of his career. I stood there, chest heaving, soaked with rain and fury, while Farris walked away. Each step he took was measured, controlled, as if the storm itself parted for him. He never looked back, because he didn't have to. He knew he had planted enough poison to let the town rot me from the inside out. The thunder roared again, drowning the sound of my own voice when I shouted after him. And in that electric silence that followed, one question carved itself into my chest like a scar. What happens when the man trying to destroy your family doesn't need to kill you because he can convince the world to do it for him? The night pressed against the windows like a fever itself, heavy and suffocating, the air too thick to breathe. My sheets clung to me, soaked in sweat, as if the bed were swallowing me whole. The ceiling spun. My skin burned and froze at once, every nerve lit with fire, while shadows twisted into shapes that whispered at the edge of my vision. Thor lay at my bedside, his massive body curled against the wooden floor, ears twitching every time I gasped or shifted. His breath was steady, but tonight even he seemed uneasy. He whined low in his throat, the kind of sound a creature makes when it senses what a human can't put into words. My fever pulled me under again. The voices came first, not voices I recognized, but dozens, layered, rushing like a river through my skull. They spoke in fragments, sharp as broken glass. Unnatural. Shame. She brought it on herself. She chose wrong. They weren't just talking about me. They were judging me, condemning me in a court without faces, without mercy. I tried to shout back, to deny them, but every word drowned in the current. My lungs filled with their accusations, my chest rising with water instead of air. I saw flashes, the church pews full of eyes, the market stalls dripping with stares, my father's silver hair gleaming like a blade at the end of the mahogany table. And always behind it all, Farris's smile, thin, poisonous, patient, as though he were waiting for me to collapse so he could name the moment as his victory. My hand clawed at the sheets. Heat scorched the inside of my body, yet I shivered violently. I thought of the scans of the shadow blooming inside me like a black flower, and of the tiny kicks beneath my palm. Life trying to rise against death. Could they feel my fear? Could they sense the battle I was already losing? The room shifted again. My fevered eyes found Thor. His dark silhouette stayed close, unflinching. He raised his head, whining louder now, his gaze locked on me, as though he could see through the fire and the drowning and the doubt. With a trembling hand, I reached toward him. My fingers brushed his fur. Coarse, warm, real. The voices faltered for a moment, the flood pausing. My lips cracked as I forced words out. Half-conscious, barely sound. If I fall, my breath stuttered. Promise me you'll guard them. Thor pressed his head into my palm with a force that anchored me. His body tensed, tail hitting the floor, once in a muted thud, as though he understood and had already sworn. His loyalty didn't need language. Tears slipped from my burning eyes, cooling on my temples. My chest rattled, caught between a cough and a sob. Don't let them, I whispered, though I couldn't finish the sentence. The fever dragged me deeper, before I could. The last thing I saw before sleep swallowed me again was Thor refusing to close his eyes, watching me with the vigilance of something older than fear. And as the darkness pulled me under, one question clawed at my mind like a splinter too deep to reach. If my strength fails, will love, pure, wordless, unyielding, be enough to keep them safe? The beauty salon smelled of hairspray and hot irons, that sharp perfume of vanity and ritual. The mirrors stretched along the walls, tall enough to catch every flicker of expression. Every smirk passed from one woman to the next, beneath the humming of blow dryers. The real noise was in the voices, low, clipped, thick with malice disguised as conversation. I shouldn't have been there. I knew that. But sometimes the worst wounds aren't from what you hear directly, but from what you overhear. I sat in the corner chair, hair damp, a cape around my shoulders, pretending to read a magazine, while every word drilled into my bones. Martha Lee was at the center, as always, the Queen of Raven Hill's whispers. Silver curls sprayed into submission, lips painted red too bright for daylight. She didn't need a microphone. Her voice had a way of filling any room, carried by that dangerous mix of confidence and cruelty. She thinks money will shield her, Martha said, lips pursed as she watched herself in the mirror. But a rich woman's sin always finds its way out. The room chuckled, not too loud, just enough. A few women exchanged knowing glances in the reflection, their eyes dancing with the thrill of tearing someone down together. Another voice chimed in from the shampoo station. I heard it wasn't even human blood on those tests. That's why they're so secretive. Someone else leaned forward, her curlers clicking against the dryer hood. It's not the first time this town's seen unnatural things. Folks just don't talk about it. Laughter rippled, quick and sharp, the sound of a predator's den. My hands gripped the magazine tighter, the glossy pages trembling as I fought the urge to stand, to scream, to demand they say it to my face instead of into their mirrors. But I didn't. My throat locked, my pulse hammered in my ears. Martha's eyes flicked up, catching mine in the reflection. For a heartbeat, the room went still. She smiled then, not warm, not kind, but the smile of someone who knows she holds the rope and you're the one with your neck in it. "Mark my words," she said, tilting her head so her earrings caught the light. "Witchcraft always shows its roots. She can polish her house on the hill, keep her husband close, parade that beast of a dog, but curses don't stay buried." The word witchcraft landed heavy, dragging centuries of suspicion and fire with it. The other women murmured in agreement, emboldened by Martha's certainty. "That explains the fever," one whispered, "and the way the dog follows her, like he's guarding something unholy." I couldn't breathe, their voices layered over each other, each rumor mutating into something worse. Curses, animal unions, punishment from God. My name no longer belonged to me. It belonged to them, reshaped in their mouths until I wasn't a woman anymore. I was a sin-given skin. Thor wasn't with me, but in that moment I wished he was. His presence had a way of silencing a room without a word, a reminder that not all loyalty can be mocked away. But here, in this hall of mirrors, it was only me and every version of myself reflected back, each one smaller, weaker, more fractured under their laughter. I let the magazine slide, closed on my lap, my voice trembling as I whispered to no one, maybe to myself, maybe to the unborn lives inside me. They don't want truth. They want firewood. No one heard. Or if they did, they pretended not to. The dryers kept humming. The mirrors kept reflecting. The women kept smiling their poison smiles. And as I sat frozen in that chair, one thought screamed in my chest louder than all their whispers combined. If an entire town decides you're guilty, what chance do you have to prove you were ever innocent? The first crack of thunder split the night in two, shaking the windows of the house on the hill. Rain hammered the roof, so hard it felt like the sky itself was trying to crush us. I woke to Daniel's voice shouting my name, raw and frantic, but my body wouldn't obey me. My chest heaved like I was breathing underwater, my skin slick with sweat, and then darkness. When I opened my eyes again, I was in his arms. The storm was everywhere, wind tearing at his jacket, rain slapping against his face, mud splashing with every desperate step he took down the driveway. Thor ran at his side, his growls drowned by the storm, his massive body pressing against Daniel's leg as if to hold us all together. I could barely keep my head upright. The world tilted in flashes. The blinking red of the radio tower in the valley, the hollow clang of the church bell shuddering in the wind, the shimmer of headlights turning slick streets into rivers of light. Daniel's grip tightened around me each time I faltered, his breath ragged in my ear. "Stay with me, Selene," he panted, his voice breaking. "Stay with me. Don't you let go. Not now." I tried to answer, but only a broken sound left my throat. My belly tightened with pain, so sharp it felt like lightning was striking inside me. Thor barked, once loud, commanding, as if urging Daniel faster. The hospital's emergency lights glowed ahead, cutting through sheets of rain. Daniel's boots pounded the pavement, water spraying with every step, his shirt plastered to his chest. By the time he burst through the sliding doors, his arms were trembling from carrying me, but he didn't stop. He shouted for help, voice booming through the sterile white light of the lobby. "Somebody? She's bleeding. She's burning up. Don't just stand there." The world blurred. Faces, uniforms, the squeak of sneakers on linoleum. Hands reached for me, pulling me onto a gurney, voices overlapping in a storm of their own. "She's tachycardic. BP dropping. Get Dr. Patel, now. Daniel wouldn't let go of my hand until security forced him back. He roared, his voice echoing down the hall. Don't take her from me. Don't take them. Thor barked again, deep and furious, straining against the arms of the orderly trying to hold him back. The dog's eyes never left me, not even when the gurney rattled through double doors into the blinding brightness of the operating room. The last thing I saw before the mask came down over my face was Daniel's silhouette, soaked and shaking, reaching for me like his soul was being torn in half. And as the anesthetic dragged me under, one thought thundered louder than the storm itself. If this night takes me, who will carry the weight of all I leave behind? The lights above me were merciless, cold, white, buzzing like hornets trapped in glass. I could feel the straps against my arms, not because they bound me, but because my body was too weak to move. The smell of antiseptic filled my lungs, sharp, metallic, mixed with something coppery I didn't want to name. My eyelids fluttered, heavy, but the sound of instruments clinking on steel trays forced me awake. I wanted to reach for Daniel, to tell him I was still here, but the only glimpse I caught was his outline, beyond the glass partition. His fists pressed against the window, his face raw with fear, his mouth forming words I couldn't hear. He was so close, and yet a world away. Dr. Farris stood in the corner, arms folded, his immaculate suit like a shadow against the fluorescent light. He wasn't holding the scalpel, but his presence filled the room like a second blade. I knew he was watching, not just me, but history being written in his favor. The surgeon leaned over me, mask hiding half his face, voice clipped, but urgent. Scalpel. The slice was pressure more than pain, a tugging, pulling sensation as if life itself was being rearranged inside me. My chest rose in shallow gasps, the monitor beside me stuttering into alarms that sent nurses scrambling. BP dropping. Push more fluids. She's crashing. The word crashing echoed, louder than thunder, louder than the storm still raging outside. I tried to speak, but all that came was a gurgle of air. And then silence. For a moment, too long, there was nothing but the static hum of the machines and the pounding of my own pulse in my ears. Until it came. A cry. Fragile. High. Piercing the sterile air like a blade of sunlight through a locked door. My body jolted. My heart stumbling into rhythm again. Baby girl, a nurse said, her voice trembling, the words slicing through my haze. Lila, premature, but breathing. Tears filled my eyes, spilling down temples too weak to lift my head. I wanted to see her, just once. But before I could even beg, another silence gripped the room. Shorter this time, sharper. The surgeon's hands moved faster, the assistants exchanging frantic glances. And then another cry, lower, raspy, but alive. Baby boy, the nurse whispered, almost reverent. Thomas, he's breathing too. My chest heaved. Relief, grief, love, they all tangled inside me until I didn't know if I was sobbing or dying or both. The cries overlapped, fragile yet defiant. Two voices that didn't ask for permission to exist. Through the glass, Daniel dropped to his knees, his hands covering his face. Even from here, I felt his body shudder. He pressed his forehead against the glass, whispering something I couldn't hear, but I knew. Their names over and over like a prayer. The heart monitor beside me wailed, a reminder that my body was still teetering on the edge. A nurse pressed a mask harder against my face, her voice shaking. "Breathe for them. Just breathe." I closed my eyes, clinging to the sound of those cries. Lila, Thomas, they were real. They were here. My body was broken. Yes, but I was still tethered to this world by the threads of their voices. Somewhere in the haze, I felt it, a choice fulfilled. I had chosen them, and in their first cries, they had chosen me back. But as the light blurred, as exhaustion dragged me deeper, one question burned with a fire I couldn't extinguish. If my body gives out now, will those tiny cries be enough to keep my name alive in this town that wants me erased? The morning sun broke through the storm clouds like a blade, flooding the hospital corridors with a light too pure for the kind of shadows that lingered there. I lay unconscious, the machines beside me breathing in rhythm. For the lungs that could no longer hold their own, every beat marking time between survival and surrender. I didn't see him, but I felt him, the weight of eyes colder than glass, fixed on me through the window. Dr. Edward Farris stood on the other side of that pane, hands tucked into his immaculate suit pockets. The corners of his lips curled into something that wasn't a smile, but the suggestion of one. His posture was perfect, his silence deliberate. He didn't need to speak. The look on his face was enough to say it all. He was waiting for the monitors to flatline, for Daniel's cries to shatter against the sterile white walls, for Ravenhill to wake to the news that Selene Ashford had failed. In health, in dignity, in the very fight for her children. Inside the room, Daniel held Lila in one arm and Thomas in the other. The twins were swaddled so tightly they looked like fragile blossoms wrapped in white, their tiny breaths uneven but insistent. His shirt was still damp from last night's storm, his hair clinging to his forehead, his body trembling not from weakness, but from the weight of holding the future in hands that had already carried too much. "Stay with us, Selene," he whispered, voice cracking, pressing his forehead to the edge of my bed. "Don't let him win. Don't leave me to fight this alone." Through the glass, Farris's gaze flicked to Daniel, and for a moment their eyes met. One man on his knees, begging life to stay. The other, standing tall, waiting for death to do his bidding. It was less a meeting of eyes than a duel of wills, silent but merciless. A nurse entered, adjusting the four, her face pale with exhaustion. "She's stable," she murmured, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her doubt. "For now." Farris's jaw tightened. He tilted his head as though listening to an invisible clock, every tick confirming his patience. His silence was sharper than any accusation he could have spoken, because silence in his hands wasn't absence. It was a blade slicing through hope without spilling a drop. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. But somewhere deep inside the fog of fever and anesthesia, I heard the faint cries of my children, fragile but alive. They reached me through the haze, thin threads tugging me back, toward the surface, toward the ache of breath. And maybe, just maybe, Farris heard them too. His expression shifted, almost imperceptibly, a flicker of annoyance breaking the surface of his composure. For the first time, it was as if the cries weren't just the sound of newborn lungs. They were defiance, proof that even before I could raise them, they had already learned to fight him. Daniel kissed the crown of Lila's head, tears falling onto the blanket, and whispered again, this time louder, eyes locked on Farris through the glass. "You won't take them. You won't take her. Not while I'm breathing." Farris didn't answer. He didn't need to. He simply turned, his polished shoes clicking against the linoleum floor as he walked away, his shadow stretching long across the corridor until the sun devoured it. But I knew this wasn't retreat. It was patience, the kind of patience that waits for cracks in the foundation, for moments of weakness to bloom into collapse. And as the cries of Lila and Thomas echoed in the room, pulling me back toward a fragile thread of life, one question burned like fire in the back of my mind. How long before the silence outside this window becomes louder than all the voices fighting for me inside? The first sound that stitched me back to the world was a soft, steady beeping, small as a metronome, stubborn as a heartbeat teaching itself how to count. The room was dim on purpose. Lamps turned low to mimic dusk. Clear boxes glowed like tiny moons, wires thin as spider silk curling into them, heat shimmering gently beneath their lids. Someone had taped a paper star above each bed. A nurse's footsteps whispered across the floor. The air smelled like sanitizer and warm plastic, and underneath it, the faint sweetness of formula. Daniel pushed my wheelchair closer. His hand was on my shoulder, strong, careful, as if I were something that might fall apart if he breathed too hard. I could feel him trying not to tremble. He didn't want me to notice, but I did. I always do. "Ready?" he asked, though the answer didn't matter. Ready or not, this was the door our lives had chosen. I nodded, throat tight. The first incubator hummed softly, a clear cradle holding a body no bigger than a loaf of bread, arms like twigs, fingers uncurling and curling as if dreaming of holding something already. A knitted cap, cream with one crooked stitch, covered her head. A tiny strip of tape braced the tube at her mouth. Her chest rose and fell in delicate stutters, but it rose. It fell. It rose again. "Lila," I whispered, the word fogging the glass. The syllables broke apart in my mouth and reassembled as a prayer. "Lila, you are mine." A nurse with tired eyes and a Braves keychain clipped to her belt smiled from the other side. "She likes your voice," she said. "Watch her oxygen." The numbers flickered upward. A small climb that felt like a miracle disguised as math. My fingers found the port in the incubator wall and slipped inside the little plastic sleeve. My hand looked enormous and clumsy, a stranger to this new world. I pressed the tip of my finger to the warm sole of Lila's foot. She flinched, then pressed back, the smallest defiance I've ever seen. I didn't realize I was crying until a tear slid past my lip and tasted like salt and metal and relief. "This is your mother," I told her, as if she might mistake me for someone else. "I'm late, but I'm here." Behind us, another monitor ticked a steadier rhythm. Daniel pushed me to the next island of light. The second incubator held an even smaller bundle, a boy with a fierce little scowl, as if he'd been born suspicious of the world and intended to audit it line by line. The nurse had tucked a blue paper star above him and written his weight in careful black marker. Numbers that looked impossible and yet were the exact measure of our hope. "Hey, Thomas," Daniel said, voice husky, the syllables landing like a promise. He slipped 2 fingers through the sleeve and offered his knuckle. Thomas latched with a mouth the size of a thimble, determined in a way that made me want to laugh and sob at the same time. I leaned closer, the chair's footrest squeaking. "Thomas, you are mine." The word mine didn't mean possession. It meant I would spend the rest of my breath paying for the privilege of saying it. Across the bay, a radio on low crackled through static and caught the tail end of a country love song before a nurse turned the dial and traded it for something softer. Rain on leaves, ocean hush, white noise that made the room feel held. Somewhere, a vending machine clunked out a lukewarm coffee for a father who'd stopped believing in sleep. NICU time doesn't move. It hovers, counting seconds with the seriousness of a courtroom. Skin to skin, the nurse asked, hopeful, glancing at my forepole and the line tugging at my wrist, "We can set it up in a bit, if your numbers hold." I wanted to say yes so fast, I was afraid I'd scare it away. "If I'm steady," I said, and force my lungs to behave like they belonged to me. I fixed my gaze on their faces, identical in the slightest ways. The slope of a nose, the stubborn line of a chin that might have come from the Ashford side, or from some ancestor who'd survived more than I ever will. Lila twitched in her sleep like she was practicing for the world. Thomas relaxed his grip and settled. A sigh so small it barely stirred the tape at his cheek. Daniel knelt beside my chair. The overhead light caught in the water at the edge of his eyes. "They're here," he said, not to me, but to whatever darkness had stalked our house and our days and our marriage. "They're here." I rested my cheek against the plastic of Lila's incubator, the coolness grounding me, the rumor that tried to eat me alive, the diagnosis coiled inside me, the town that sharpened its words like knives. They all stood on the other side of this glass now, smaller than the rise and fall of her ribs. "You don't belong to them," I told the twins. "Not to their stories, not to their fear. You belong to us. You belong to the morning. You belong to the breath you're taking right now." A nurse rolled past with a tiny syringe on a tray, moving like a person who has learned to honor quiet as medicine. She stopped at Thomas's station and checked his numbers. "Good boy," she murmured. "Stubborn is useful in here." She looked up at me. "You did good, Mama." I didn't feel good. My body felt like it had been cut open and re-sewn by angels with shaking hands. The mass they'd found hadn't gone anywhere. It was waiting, taking notes. I could feel the ache under the morphine, a reminder that the bill would come due. But for once I didn't flinch from the cost. I measured it against the sight of 2 pulses threading through blue plastic and decided I could afford it for 1 more minute. Then another. Then another. "Can I?" I asked, nodding toward the small window in Lila's box where mothers tuck promises they can't keep out loud. The nurse slid the hatch open. I fed in a folded slip of paper Daniel had stolen from admissions, my handwriting uneven from the 4. "Lila, Thomas, learn the sound of your own names before you learn the names they'll call you." I pressed the paper flat beside the tape thermometer and felt something inside me settle. Daniel breathed out a laugh he'd been holding for months. "Leave it to you to write a manifesto on a scrap." "It's not a manifesto," I said, smiling for the first time since the storm. "It's a map." He kissed my hair and rested his forehead against mine. For a moment, the machines, the tubes, the alarms receded, and we were just 2 people who'd gotten lost and somehow arrived anyway. I turned back to our children. "Listen," I said, "you hear it? That sound." The beeps kept time. The vents sighed. The white noise moved like a calm tide through the room. "That's hope," I whispered. "It doesn't shout. It checks your vitals and comes back every hour." Lila's foot flexed against my finger. Thomas's mouth opened in a sleepy yawn, the bravest yawn I've ever seen. I memorized them like a thief, the curl of a hand, the delicate fuzz at the edge of an ear, the way the light pooled in the curve of a cheek. I wanted to gather proof, armfuls of it, to carry back to the hill when the town demanded receipts for my joy. A shadow moved across the window of the NICU, a figure pausing, then passing on. I didn't need to see the face to recognize the posture. Some enemies speak louder through glass than they do in person. Let him look. Let him count my scars and call them evidence. I had better evidence now. I'm not done. I told the air, and maybe the air told someone else. The nurse returned with warmed blankets, the kind that smell faintly of cotton and steam. We can try now, she said, one at a time. We'll place Lila first. If you get dizzy, you say the word. My mouth went dry at the idea of her weight on me, the heat of her cheek, the truth of her skin. Fear and longing collided, so hard I felt lightheaded sitting still. Daniel hovered at my elbow like a necessary wing. They lifted Lila out. So carefully the world seemed to hold its breath. Her wires trailed like delicate roots. The nurse lowered her onto my chest, beneath the blanket, against the line of my scar. Warmth, sharp and immediate, spread through my bones. A birdseed heart beat against me, insistent. Her mouth opened, searching, then rested. I closed my eyes and let tears slide hot and clean. You're mine, I breathed into the top of her cap. Not as a claim, but as a vow, and I am yours. I felt Thomas's incubator hum at my side. A twin son, both of you, always. Daniel's hand covered my back, gentle pressure, saying what words would ruin. On the other side of the glass, the hospital kept being a hospital. Phones ringing, wheels squeaking, doors sighing. The country song on the radio found its way back for a single line about making it through the night, and then fuzzed out again, as if the universe decided one line was enough and any more would be showing off. The nurse checked the monitors. Numbers blinked, steady. See that, she said softly. She hears you. She follows your breath. I breathed deeper, slow, deliberate, borrowing courage from my own lungs. The pain flickered, then dimmed, like someone had turned down a dimmer switch, just enough to see the room more clearly. I let the sight of us stamp itself into the part of me nothing could touch. My daughter asleep on my heart, my son watching like a sentry from his glowing boat, my husband kneeling at sea level, hands open, ready to catch whatever fell. The beeps counted on. The room held, and still, beneath the warmth and the wonder, a brass-knuckled question pressed close. When the next hard hour comes, and I can feel it coming, will this small, fierce peace be enough to face it? Lila stirred, as if answering in a language older than mine. Her fingers fanned, then curled, catching the edge of my gown, a tiny grip with unreasonable faith. Okay, I said, to her, to him, to the waiting dark beyond the window I refused to look at. Then we keep breathing. We keep counting. We keep being ours. The NICU clock ticked, the way clocks do when they know you're listening. Somewhere in the hallway, a cart rattled past carrying bottles and a stack of blankets that smelled like sleep. A father whispered a nursery rhyme off key. A nurse hummed without realizing it. I pressed my cheek to Lila's cap and, without permission, without apology, began to plan the next minute. And then the next. Not the next year. Not the next lifetime. Just the next minute. Because sometimes the first breath of hope is not a shout from the mountaintop. Sometimes it's the weight of your child on your chest and the evidence that, for this exact second, you are both still here. The doors hissed open behind me, the hospital's air conditioning giving way to the punishing heat of Raven Hill's noon. The plaza lay ahead, cobblestones cracked from years of rain and sun, ringed by shops with peeling paint and gossip thicker than dust. I could feel the silence before I saw the faces. They were waiting for me. Daniel's hand brushed mine, steady but trembling just under the skin. Thor patted at my side, his dark coat glinting like onyx beneath the sun. His breath was measured, but the low rumble in his chest betrayed what he sensed, that this was no ordinary walk. This was trial by fire, and the square was the pyre. The first step landed heavy, echoing louder than it should have. Then the stairs gathered, pulling at me from every direction. Women with arms crossed in the shade of the drugstore doorway. Old men leaning on canes, whispering without lowering their voices. Teenagers pretending to check their phones, but watching every inch I moved. And Martha Lee herself, Queen of Whispers, perched by the fountain with her lips curved like she had been saving her smile for my fall. The sound wasn't words at first. It was a rustle, a hiss, the way dry grass catches fire before the flame shows itself. Then came the bite. Her dog. Poor Daniel. Money hides everything. Should have stayed behind closed doors. Each phrase cracked against me, one after another, until I felt like I was walking inside a storm of shards. My body ached from stitches still raw, but this was sharper. I thought of Lila's foot pressing against my finger, of Thomas's stubborn little grip. Their names whispered inside me like armor. Lila, Thomas. That was the rhythm I chose to walk to. Thor's growl broke the air when a man spit near my feet, the sound wet and deliberate. My heart lurched, but I didn't stop. Daniel shifted closer, ready to break bone if he had to, but I touched his wrist. One small gesture to remind him, not now, not here, halfway across the square. The sunlight struck the church's stained glass window and splintered colors across the stones. It painted me in fragments, red, gold, blue, like the town was trying to decide what I was. Sinner? Victim? Freak? I stopped. Let the colors fall. Let the silence thicken. When I raised my chin, I caught every eye that thought it had the right to own me. My voice came low at first, then stronger, carried not by defiance, but by something quieter and harder. No lie weighs heavier than my truth. The words didn't silence the crowd, not completely. They rippled through it, unsettling like thunder too close to place. Martha's smirk faltered just enough for me to see the fear she tried to disguise as amusement. An old man shifted his cane from one hand to the other. A child tugged at his mother's dress, asking something she didn't answer. Thor pressed against my leg, and Daniel's grip tightened around my hand, not leading me, not shielding me, but holding steady, two anchors keeping me upright in the storm. I walked on. Each step scraped against the cobblestones. Each breath scorched my throat, but I made it across, my shadow long on the stones, their whispers trailing behind me like smoke. The truth had no audience, no applause. It had only weight, but for the first time, that weight felt like mine to carry and not theirs to throw. And as the last stone clicked beneath my heel, A question twisted sharp and unrelenting inside me. If standing tall could fracture the silence today, what might it break tomorrow? The roses had been trimmed that morning, each stem cut into obedient perfection, their red petals gleaming like drops of blood against the trimmed hedges of the Ashford estate. I walked through the gravel path with my steps echoing louder than I wanted, the air thick with the kind of silence that carried unsaid words heavier than stone. My father was waiting near the old stone fountain, hands clasped behind his back, posture unbent despite the weight of years. For a moment, I almost saw him as the town saw him. Richard Ashford, empire builder, master of hotels, man whose name hung over Ravenhill like a crown. But today his shoulders were tighter, his eyes not sharpened by command, but clouded by something else. Fear. He didn't turn when I stopped a few feet away. Only his voice reached me, low and uneven. I have been accused of many things in my life, Selene. Ruthlessness, coldness, pride. And I wore those labels as if they were armor. But today, when you walked across that square with the world against you, I felt something I could not name. The gravel crunched under my shoes as I closed the distance. Every step a reminder of how far we'd been from each other. My chest ached. Not from wounds, not from fever, but from the collision of two worlds. The daughter who wanted his love, and the woman who no longer needed his permission to exist. He finally looked at me. His silver hair caught the sun, his jaw rigid, but his eyes, blue like cold steel, were damp at the edges. I spoke harshly to you before, he admitted, his voice breaking the air like glass. I told you weakness would destroy our name. I called your pain an embarrassment, but when I saw you today, he stopped, inhaling sharply as if even confession cost him something. I realized strength doesn't wear a crown. It doesn't build empires. It doesn't sit at mahogany tables signing contracts. Strength stands in the fire and refuses to bow. For the first time in years, he lowered his head, just slightly, but enough to fracture everything I thought impossible. I didn't rush to answer. I let the silence fill between us, carried by the distant chirp of cicadas and the steady trickle of water in the fountain. My throat tightened, and I wondered if he knew how many nights I had begged in silence for words like these. Yet pride still hung around him, a cloak he could not take off. Even now, "Father," I whispered, the word foreign on my tongue. Do you know what I carried across that square today? It wasn't shame. It wasn't fear. It was truth. And truth is heavier than any crown you've ever worn. He closed his eyes, and in that moment, I saw not the empire, not the patriarch, but a man old enough to regret. You taught me today, he said softly, almost to himself, that even I have been a coward. The roses stirred in the breeze, releasing a faint sweetness that felt almost cruel against the heaviness of his confession. He reached out, hesitant, his hand trembling as if unsure whether I would allow him the grace of touch. I let him rest it lightly on my shoulder, fragile and heavy at once. And in that still garden, pride and tenderness collided, but neither won. Only questions lingered. Could wounds like ours ever truly close? Or were we destined to walk as strangers tied by blood, but divided by silence? The fountain kept spilling its water, as if it had all the time in the world to wait for an answer. The bell above the diner door jingled, sharp against the low murmur of morning voices and the sizzle of bacon on the griddle. I stepped inside, and the smell of fried potatoes, butter, and burnt coffee clung to me like a second skin. Ravenhill's diner had always been a place of routine. Farmers rubbing sleep from their eyes, women gossiping over pie, men folding their newspapers in half like shields. But today, the air felt split, electric, as if the very walls had chosen sides. Conversations broke off when I entered. Forks hovered midair. Even the waitress, June, froze with the coffee pot dangling in her hand, the steam rising between us like an unspoken accusation. At the far booth, Martha Lee tilted her chin toward me, her lipstick perfect, her smile sharpened like a blade. She leaned into the ear of the journalist beside her, her voice pitched to Carrie. "Courage," she said with a sneer, "is just another word for stubbornness dressed up in Sunday clothes." Her words dripped into the silence, staining it. A few nods followed, but then, from the counter, an old man set down his cup of black coffee with a decisive clink. His voice rasped, but carried a weight that filled the room. "Lies die," he said slowly, his eyes fixed on me, "when truth refuses to kneel." The diner split in half with those words. One side, Martha and her flock, hissed like snakes disturbed in their nest. The other side stirred, uneasy, glancing at me with something almost human again. Doubt, a seed cracking open in the dark. I felt Thor press against my leg, steady and silent, his presence a wall no slander could breach. Daniel stood at my side, jaw clenched, as if ready to catch the next insult before it reached me. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the unbearable weight of all those eyes, all those verdicts being passed in real time. A young woman near the window broke the silence next. Her apron smelled of flour, her hair tied in a tired bun. She walked across that square yesterday, she said, voice quivering but strong, head high, carrying more than most of us ever could. Maybe that's not weakness. Maybe that's the only strength left worth respecting. Martha's laugh cut the air, brittle and rehearsed. Respect? For sin? For filth parading as virtue? Her eyes narrowed on me, cruel delight dancing in their corners. The world should not bend to her lies. It should burn them. The words stung, sharper than the fever that had clawed through me nights before. For a moment, I wanted to answer, to hurl back every truth she was too cowardly to face. But I swallowed it down. Silence has its own power. Silence can make lies rot in their own echo. Still, the divide deepened. One table leaned toward Martha, eager for her poison. Another turned their backs to her, muttering under breaths, as if ashamed of having believed her for so long. And me? I stood in the doorway of that ordinary diner, the cheap linoleum under my feet, and felt the weight of a town tearing itself apart on my name. The journalist scribbled in his notebook, head down but ears wide open. Every word spoken here would bleed into tomorrow's paper, into more whispers, into either chains or freedom. Which would it be? I breathed in, steady, tasting the grease, the coffee, the metallic tang of fear. The old man at the counter kept his gaze locked on me, unshaken, as though daring me not to bow under the storm. And in that fragile, charged moment, a question pressed against my chest like a knife. Would Ravenhill ever learn to tell truth from venom? Or had the town already chosen to feed on its own hatred, no matter the cost? The silence stretched, the coffee steamed, and I knew every second was tipping the scales one way or the other. The hospital corridor at night was never quiet. The fluorescent lights hummed, the floor smelled faintly of bleach, and every so often a cart rolled by, its wheels rattling like bones. But that night, something else hung in the air, a tension thick enough to choke on, a storm waiting for a hand to break it open. I stood there, fists clenched, every nerve in my body sparking, because finally, after all the whispers, all the poison, the shadows had started to turn against Edward Farris. He stood at the far end of the hall, his suit immaculate, his tie unwrinkled, as if appearances alone could still shield him. Around him hovered two board members, their faces lined with doubt, the kind of doubt that cracks power from the inside. Papers had been filed, complaints, testimonies. Even nurses had begun to speak, their voices trembling, but steady enough to put cracks in his polished mask. And yet, Farris smiled. Always that smile. Cold, rehearsed, dripping with the same venom he had used to lace Selene's suffering. His eyes caught mine, and for a moment I saw the truth behind them. Not concern, not authority, but hunger. He had fed on every rumor, every wound, and he wasn't done. I walked toward him, my boots echoing against the sterile tile, the sound too loud, too violent for that space. I didn't stop until I was close enough to smell his cologne, expensive, metallic, as if even that carried a hidden blade. My voice came out low, shaking but sharp. You fed on her pain. That's your legacy. His smile faltered, not gone but cracked. The board members glanced at each other, shifting uncomfortably, because in that moment my words weren't mine alone. They carried every stare, every whisper of the town that had watched Selene bleed and nearly break. Farris's reply was a whisper, soft enough that only I could hear. Legacies are written by survivors, and she was never meant to be one. The words struck like a slap, but I didn't flinch. I leaned closer, my jaw tight, and let my rage breathe against his calm. She is one, and that's why you're finished. The silence that followed was heavier than the sound of any gavel. One of the board members cleared his throat, muttering about further review. Another scribbled notes with nervous hands. The world wasn't collapsing around Farris, not yet, but the cracks were spreading, and he knew it. For the first time, I saw it in his eyes, not the arrogance, not the composure, but fear. Small, flickering, but real, and it was enough to keep me standing when all I wanted was to drag him into the ground myself. Still, as I turned away, my heart pounding against my ribs, a question burned hotter than the anger itself. Men like him never fall cleanly. They leave debris, poison that seeps long after their names are gone from plaques and doors. Would Ravenhill be free of him? Truly? Or would his shadow keep crawling, even after the man himself was stripped of his throne? The corridor lights buzzed above me. My fists trembled, and behind me, Farris's silence followed, heavier than his words ever were. Dawn came in bands of soft gold and bruised lavender, like the sky had decided to start over, but hadn't figured out how yet. I stepped onto the balcony barefoot, the boards cool against my skin, the air thin with that clean smell you get after a hard rain, the kind that finds the last bits of dust and drags them out of the world. Below me, the valley lay quiet, barns and silo tops catching the first light, church steeple pointing upward like a finger reminding me to breathe. Somewhere a rooster crowed too late, as if even the morning needed a second try. Behind me, through the cracked bedroom door, the white noise machine sighed. Two tiny shapes slept inside, one with her hands coiled near her chin, one with his mouth open in a stubborn half-yawn, their chests rising like small boats on a steady tide. I could hear Daniel moving in the kitchen, soft clink of a mug, the kettle's patient rattle. In the corner of the balcony, Thor stretched and settled at my feet, his head heavy on my toes, a living sandbag keeping me from drifting anywhere I shouldn't. The town looked smaller from up here. The diner with its crooked sign, the hospital's flat roof catching a stripe of light, the square where I learned what it costs to keep your spine straight. I could almost hear the whispers rising from the streets like steam off hot asphalt. New ones, reheated ones, a few stubborn enough to outlast sleep. They weren't loud, but they had teeth. They always do. I placed a palm on the railing, felt the tiny burrs of would snag at my skin, and let the quiet do what it came to do. My body still hurt, in honest, specific ways. A tug along the scar, a deep ache where the fight had set up camp, the kind of fatigue that doesn't ask permission. I had the doctor's future stamped in my discharge papers. Treatments, scans, words that sounded like traffic reports from roads I didn't choose to drive. I had the town's future stamped in yesterday's paper. Columns arranged like a jury that never adjourned. Between those pages and this view, there were so many verdicts waiting to be read. I decided not to read any of them before the sun cleared the ridge. Thor lifted his head and looked at me as if to ask whether we were staying put or charging the field. I scratched the place between his ears, felt the warmth of him move into my hand, and heard my voice before I knew I meant to speak. Sometimes standing still is the loudest way to fight. The words didn't echo. They fell and stayed where they landed. A hawk cut a clean line over the pasture. A truck down on County Road 7 shifted gears and lumbered toward the feed store. Ordinary life threaded itself through the same air that had carried our names through so much ugliness. That was the strangest part, how cruelty and regular mornings share space, like neighbors who gnawed at each other over the fence while pretending they didn't hear the shouting last night. I thought of Farris's glass smile and the board's hollow promises, thought of Martha Lee and the way her eyes glittered when she found new kindling, thought of my father in the rose garden, the thorns he kept clipped so neatly he forgot what they were made for. I felt the tug of anger. Then let it run its course like a summer storm you can't outrun. Let it rain and pass. Some battles you choose, some you outlast. Inside, a small sound, Lila's soft, testing whimper, rose and faded. I stood very still, listening, counting the seconds, waiting to see whether it would bloom into a cry. It didn't. Thomas sighed in reply. Their wordless exchange, the most fluent conversation in the house. I exhaled, slow, matched to their rhythm. The valley inhaled with me. The light climbed. I pressed my fingers to the pulse in my wrist. There, a steady drum. I pressed the same hand flat to the railing and felt the drum repeat in the grain. I pictured the market, the churchyard, the salon's walled mirrors, each place that turned into a courtroom when my name walked through. I pictured them empty for a moment, chairs upturned, floors swept. I pictured them waiting for whoever they'd try to burn next if I didn't keep catching flame and showing how to walk through it without giving them a scream. The kettle clicked off inside. A few seconds later, Daniel's footsteps came soft across the living room, paused at the nursery door. I didn't turn. I didn't need to. He knew where I was the same way I knew when his breath steadied, when his hands stopped shaking on the doorknob after the worst of this was over. We're learning each other's quiets again. It feels like a skill more important than forgiveness. A pickup rolled into the square like nothing had ever happened. Someone unfurled the flag over the courthouse and let it lift into the morning like it believed every word sewn into it. I wondered whether the town would find a way to stitch me back in, or if I even wanted it to. Maybe belonging doesn't mean letting them write your story. Maybe it means standing where they can see you and refusing to bend until your shape becomes familiar enough that they stop calling it strange. Thor's tail thumped once, twice, a metronome set to patience. My phone buzzed in the pocket of my robe. 2 new messages, 3 headlines, a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. I didn't answer. Not yet. The day would drag me down the hills soon enough, back into appointments and signatures, and a dozen careful promises delivered in cautious tones. There would be kindness I didn't expect, and cruelty that arrived right on time. There would be moments when the truth felt heavier than my hands could hold. There would be another night when fever licked the edges of my vision, when every prayer felt like air scratching against a locked door. But not in this minute. In this minute, I let the sun find my face. I let the scar do whatever it wanted without apology. I let the rumor die and resurrect, and die again 2 miles down the road without sending it flowers. I let the house remember how to be a house. Floorboards, windows, a roof that knows how to keep weather where it belongs. I let the babies sleep. I let the dog breathe. I let myself exist in the simplest verb we have. I stood still. A flock of starlings rose from the line of trees and stitched wild patterns over the valley, each wingbeat a decision made and remade in perfect, living math. I watched them until they blurred into one shape. Then I turned back toward the open door, where warm air met cool, and the soft hum of machine and infant breath called me back inside. I took one step, stopped, looked out at Raven Hill one more time, not to forgive it, not to curse it, just to meet it where it stood. The whispers were still out there. I could feel them, thin and busy. Let them work. I had work of my own that didn't need an audience. Somewhere between the next feeding, the next lab result, the next look from a stranger trying to see if I'd break, something waited, not an ending exactly, but a turn I couldn't quite see. The light climbed another inch. Thor rose, shook himself, and fell in behind me. I left the balcony door open a crack, so the morning could follow us in and prove, for at least a little while, that a single breath held on purpose can be louder than a town full of voices deciding who you're allowed to be. Imagine this: you've walked beside Selene, felt the fire of Daniel's fury, and even leaned on the silent loyalty of Thor. You've seen a woman stand in the middle of whispers, storms, and betrayal, and still choose to rise, broken yet unbowed. Now I ask you, what would you do if the world pointed fingers at your scars instead of your strength? Would you bend to their voices, or would you stand still, breathing, just like Selene? This isn't just her story. It's a mirror. Maybe for you, maybe for someone you love. So tell me in the comments, which moment struck your heart the hardest? Which truth in Selene's fight felt like your own? And don't just keep it to yourself. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that silence can be strength, that love can be armor, and that even in the darkest night, there is still a dawn waiting. If Selene's courage, Daniel's devotion, or Thor's loyalty moved you even for a second, hit subscribe and turn on the bell, Because these aren't just stories. They are reminders that we all carry battles unseen, and sometimes what saves us is knowing we're not alone. So, I'll leave you with one question. When the time comes, will you choose fear, or will you choose to stand? Even if the whole world watches, speak your truth below. Your words may be exactly what someone else needs